The Etruscans are rightfully considered one of the most amazing mysteries in history. Scientists don't know exactly where they came from or what language they spoke. The Etruscans are rightfully considered one of the most amazing mysteries in history. Scientists don't know exactly where they came from or what language they spoke. The question of a possible connection between the Etruscans and Russians has still not been clarified. Under the veil of secrets. In the middle of the first millennium BC, on the territory of Italy, between the Tiber and Arno rivers, stretched the legendary state of Etruria, which became the cradle of Roman civilization. The Romans eagerly learned from the Etruscans, borrowing from them systems of government and gods, engineering and mosaics, gladiator fights and chariot races, funeral rites and clothing. Despite their fame, the Etruscans are one complete mystery for us. Much evidence has been preserved about the Etruscans, but they do not give us a convincing and reliable picture of the life of this people. Scientists do not know for certain how the Etruscans appeared and where they disappeared. The exact boundaries of Etruria have not yet been established and the Etruscan language has not been deciphered. The Roman Emperor Claudius I, who ruled in the 1st century AD, left to his descendants the 20-volume history of the Etruscans, as well as a dictionary of the Etruscan language. But fate would have it that these manuscripts were completely destroyed in the fire of the Library of Alexandria, depriving us of the opportunity to lift the veil of secrets of the Etruscan civilization. People from the East. Today there are 3 versions of the origin of the Etruscans. Titus Livius reports that the Etruscans penetrated the Apennine Peninsula from the north together with the Alpine Rits, with whom they were related. According to the hypothesis of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the Etruscans were natives of Italy who adopted the achievements of the previous Villanova culture. However, the Alpine version does not find any material evidence, and modern scientists increasingly associate the Villanova culture not with the Etruscans, but with the Italics. Historians have long noticed how the Etruscans stood out from their less developed neighbors. This served as a prerequisite for the 3rd version, according to which the Etruscans settled the Apennines from Asia Minor. This view was held by Herodotus, who argued that the ancestors of the Etruscans came from Lydia in the 8th century BC. There is a lot of evidence of the Asia Minor origin of the Etruscans. For example, the way of creating sculptures. The Etruscans, unlike the Greeks, preferred not to carve an image from stone, but to sculpt it from clay, which was typical for the art of the peoples of Asia Minor. There is also more important evidence of the eastern origin of the Etruscans. At the end of the 19th century, on the island of Lemnos, located near the coast of Asia Minor, archaeologists discovered a tombstone. The inscription on it was made in Greek letters, but in a completely unusual combination. Imagine the surprise of the scientists when, after comparing this inscription with Etruscan texts, they discovered striking similarities. Bulgarian historian Vladimir Georgiev offers an interesting development of the Eastern version. In his opinion, the Etruscans are none other than the legendary Trojans. The scientist bases his assumptions on the legend according to which the Trojans, led by Aeneas, fled from war-torn Troy to the Apennine Peninsula. Georgiev also supports his theory with linguistic considerations, finding a relationship between the words Etruria and Troy. One might be skeptical about this version if in 1972 Italian archaeologists had not excavated an Etruscan tomb monument dedicated to Aeneas. Genetic map. Not long ago, scientists from the University of Turin, using genetic analysis, decided to test Herodotus' hypothesis about the Asia Minor origin of the Etruscans. The study compared the Y chromosomes, transmitted through the male line, of the population of Tuscany and residents of other regions of Italy, as well as the island of Lemnos, the Balkan Peninsula and Turkey. It turned out that the genetic samples of residents of the Tuscan cities of Volterra and Merlo are more similar to those of residents of the eastern Mediterranean than to neighboring Italian regions. Moreover, some genetic characteristics of the inhabitants of Merlo absolutely coincide with the genetic data of the inhabitants of Turkey. Researchers from Stanford University decided to use computer modeling to reconstruct the demographic processes that affected the population of Tuscany over the past 2,500 years. This method initially involved data from anthropological and genetic examination. The results were unexpected. Scientists have been able to rule out a genetic connection between the Etruscans, the ancient inhabitants of central Italy, and the modern inhabitants of Tuscany. The data obtained suggest that the Etruscans were wiped off the face of the earth by some kind of catastrophe, or that they represented a social elite that had little in common with the ancestors of modern Italians. The phonetic proximity of the two ethnonyms, Etruscans and Russians, gives rise to hypotheses among researchers about the direct connection of the two peoples. Philosopher Alexander Dugin understands this connection literally: Etruscan is Russian. The plausibility of this version is also given by the self-name of the Etruscans, Rasenna or Rusna. However, if the word Etruscan is compared with the Roman name of this people, Tusci, and the self-name Racina is associated with the Greek name of the Etruscans, Tiacini, then the closeness of the Etruscans and Russians no longer looks so obvious. There is enough evidence that the Etruscans could leave the territory of Italy. One of the reasons for the exodus may have been climate change, accompanied by drought. It coincided with the disappearance of this people in the 1st century BC. Presumably, the Etruscan migration routes should have extended to the north, which was more favorable for farming. Evidence of this, for example, are urns discovered in Upper Germany for storing the ashes of the deceased, which are similar to Etruscan artifacts. It is likely that some of the Etruscans reached the territory of the present Baltic states, where they could assimilate with the Slavic peoples. However, the version that the Etruscans laid the foundations of the Russian ethnic group is not supported by anything. The main problem is the absence of the sounds B, D and G in the Etruscan language. The structure of the larynx did not allow the Etruscans to pronounce them. This feature of the vocal apparatus is more reminiscent not of Russians, but of Finns or Estonians. One of the recognized apologists of Etruscology, the French scientist Zachary Mayani, turns the vector of Etruscan settlement immediately to the east. In his opinion, the descendants of the Etruscans are modern Albanians. Among the justifications for his hypothesis, the scientist cites the fact that the capital of Albania, Tirana, bears one of the names of the Etruscans, Tyrrhenians. The overwhelming majority of scientists believe that the Etruscans simply disappeared into the ethnic group of the peoples who inhabited the Roman Empire. The speed of assimilation of the Etruscans may well be a consequence of their small numbers. According to archaeologists, the population of Etruria, even at the time of its heyday, did not exceed 25,000 people. The study of Etruscan writing has been carried out since the 16th century. What languages were used as a basis to decipher Etruscan inscriptions? Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Celtic, Finnish, even the languages of the American Indians. But all attempts were unsuccessful. Etruscan is unreadable, said skeptical linguists. However, scientists still achieved certain results. They established that the Etruscan alphabet originates from Greek and consists of 26 letters. Moreover, the alphabet borrowed from the Greeks did not correspond well to the peculiarities of the phonetics of the Etruscan language. Some sounds, depending on the context, had to be denoted by different letters. Moreover, late Etruscan texts were guilty of omitting vowel sounds, which created an almost impossible task of deciphering them. And yet, some linguists, in their words, managed to read part of the Etruscan inscriptions. 3 19th-century scientists at once, the Pole Tadeusz Wolański, the Italian Sebastiano Ciompi and the Russian Alexander Chertkov, declared that the key to deciphering Etruscan texts lies in the Slavic languages. Russian linguist Valery Chudinov followed in Wolański's footsteps, proposing that the Etruscan language be considered the successor to the Slavic runic writing. Official science is skeptical about both Chudinov's attempts to antiquate Slavic writing and his ability to read inscriptions where an inexperienced person sees a play of nature. Modern researcher Vladimir Sherbakov tries to simplify the problem of translating Etruscan inscriptions, explaining that the Etruscans wrote as they heard. With this method of decoding, many Etruscan words in Sherbakov sound completely Russian: eater, this, armor, pit, tess, forest. Linguist Peter Zolan notes in this regard that any attempt to read texts of such antiquity using modern words is absurd. Academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences Andrei Zalesnik adds, an amateur linguist willingly immerses himself in the discussion of written monuments of the past, completely forgetting, or simply not knowing anything, that in the past the language he knew looked completely different from what it is now. Today, most historians are convinced that the Etruscan inscriptions will never be deciphered.